I'm Chuck Todd. We're continuing our breaking news coverage of Hurricane Ian right now on NBC News Now. It's a massive storm. It made landfall as a Category 4 hurricane. It's one of the largest and most powerful storms to slam into the United States in recent memory, and Florida's had its share of monster storms. Ian now near the top of that list. Ian officially made landfall last hour near the town of Cayo Costa, Florida, and as Bill Cairns will tell you later, it's actually the second time Cayo Costa has seen a massive storm go over its little barrier island. As Ian moves further inland, winds are being measured now around 145 miles an hour. Just a few hours ago, winds were hitting 155 miles per hour, which is just technically 2 miles short of a Category 5 strength rating. Potentially, the biggest danger we're watching right now is from life-threatening storm surge. Forecasters are predicting as much as 18 feet of water in certain areas. That's anywhere from 2 to 3 times as much as these areas have ever gotten in storm surge in any previous storm. Currently, more than 800,000 people have lost power. That number probably will only grow. All day, we've been monitoring the storm surge in Naples. Take a look at how the waters have been rising there all afternoon. Over the span of about 3 hours, and we can show you this, we have seen it rise to the point of consuming entire vehicles. As you can see here, you just go through our little time lapse here, and you just watch the water level rise and rise and rise to the point where vehicles are almost entirely engulfed in water. The water is expected to continue to rise in the coming hours, though it has begun to slightly recede in the last few minutes. In addition to that storm surge, we have flash flooding concerns all over central Florida, as there is a forecast that this storm could slow to a crawl, and depending on how slow it goes will depend on how bad those potential flood warnings will turn out to be. Orlando could see as much as 24 inches of rain, in addition to tornadoes and near 100-mile-per-hour winds. My mother lives in Seminole County. It's an inland county. It's a landlocked county, and they're under a hurricane warning. They expect winds of more than 75 miles an hour sustained. So to give you a sense of just how massive this hurricane is, take a look at this graphic. So Hurricane Charlie devastated Florida in 2004. The actual size of the storm could fit inside Ian's eye, okay? Charlie could fit inside Ian's eye. That's how massive this storm is. Let's bring in MSNBC anchor Ali Velshi, whose camera in Naples has basically been telling us the story almost without words. You know, Ali, we can sit here and watch your camera, and we've been watching the cars, we've been watching the floating refrigerators, you've been watching that and more. Paint the picture, Ali.
Well, you know, Chuck, I've known each other for a long time. Today was one of those few days where at one point I had just Randy, our photographer, just shoot it, and I didn't even talk while I was live on TV, because we understood things like storm surges that we talk about all the time, which most people think of flooding. We understood it differently. Here's that picture you were looking at earlier. A couple things to tell our viewers. So you're right, it has in the last few minutes started to recede, partially because 3:20 p.m. Eastern was high tide here. So at least we're now, the actual tide is coming out where the surge is still going in. So you can see a line of water that's pushing in, but you can see after a few minutes it sort of eddies and starts to come back out again. Now we see another push of water in. So there's a surge versus the reversing tide. But there was a lineup of cars on the right and on the left. This is the parking lot of the hotel we're staying at. And those cars were all lined up like parked cars. And look at them all. The water just pushed them. They just floated away. Bill Cairns always tells us, 6 inches of water can float your car. We had 5 feet of water here. And this is not even close to the water that we're seeing north of me, where we're still seeing 145-mile-per-hour winds and 12 to 18 feet of storm surge. This was 5-6 feet, something of that nature. Anyway, the point is it's not over. There's still a lot more. We actually just got the updated power outage numbers. Well over 1 million people in the state of Florida. There are 40,000 line workers, the electrical line workers, go up with those trucks to fix the line. They're standing by. They positioned. Every time there's a hurricane, everywhere you go, every time I travel to a hurricane, I see convoys of these trucks. They're ready to go. They're staying at motels and hotels around Florida. They're ready to go, but they can't until the wind drops down below 50 miles an hour and this water recedes, because there's debris and damage and stuff underneath this water that they can't do. And that's not going to be till probably tomorrow sometime. I'm going to ask Randy just to show you, now that the water has pulled back a lot, it's still a pretty rough Gulf of Mexico right now, and there's still virtually no beach to see. There's no sand, but you're starting to see the water level has come down. Again, there's still places in Florida, Chuck, that have it far worse than we do at this point, but we are starting to feel like we're on the other side of this thing, or at least getting
I was just going to say, though,
night for a lot of people, Chuck.
I was just going to say, you're on the dirty side of this storm, though, aren't you? So this is not going to be an easy night,
Yes.
I don't think. I mean, I hope it is for your sake, Allie, but
it's not. And look,
the dirty side, yeah.
You just saw it pick up again, right? This is right. You just so this happens, right? You get gusts, you get bands, and I'm leaning over here, and you can just hear the wind in my mic, right? It's an entirely different experience because I'm sitting in a relatively sheltered area. But as you know, Chuck, the water's always more dangerous than the wind in most typical American hurricanes. And what I'm seeing now, when I look at those carports underneath those places across, they were up to the top in the last hour.
Yeah.
Now you've got 3.5 feet below it. So that part of the risk is starting to diminish. But you're absolutely right. It is not over. There's many hours of this hurricane left, and it's still dangerous. And it's just, we can maybe start to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
We just don't want people to get out. I mean, that's the thing. Don't think this event is over down there anyway. And now you know why so many Florida houses put the first floor of their house above the garage. This is the reason.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
All right, Allie Velshi.
And by the way, there are mandatory evacuations like where we are now. There are curfews. The authorities are very clear. On your phone, you get these alerts that say shelter in place. Nobody's supposed to be going anywhere right now. Wait this thing out wherever you are. Stay safe. Exactly.
You don't have a Randy with you or an Allie Velshi. If I had Randy and Allie, I know I'd be safe. I know how Randy is. That's the guy I want on my crew any day of the week. Anyway, tell him hello from me.
That's right.
All right, let me move up the coast from Naples to Steve Patterson, who's in St. Petersburg, Florida. And perhaps St. Pete has dodged a bullet. Steve, what do you see there? Look, they're not getting a direct hit, but you're getting, obviously, some tough weather. What are you seeing?
Unequivocally, we've dodged a bullet here. There's no doubt about that. I mean, we were expecting a direct landfall. We were expecting the eye of the storm to be here by now. Now you can see people walking behind me. Not to say that the wind event hasn't been incredible already. And already we're hearing reports of trees down, of power lines down, about 100,000 customers without power as we speak. In not only this county, but about 3 counties that make up Tampa Bay. As you see people curious here along the shoreline. Mandatory evacuation orders, I should say, underway here as well. People should not be out here. And if they are, they cannot leave this area because now the wind event, the rain event is moving in. And this is not the worst of it, Chuck. We expect about 7, 8, 9 o'clock or so to when we get that real surge, not only off the coast, but the storm surge as well. As the tide has been receding, it will come back in. We expect about 4 to 6 feet of storm surge. It's not as much as we're getting in the eye of the storm, but 4 to 6 can be quite a bit when you're talking about an area like Tampa Bay, where there are low-lying properties. So the potential for obviously flooding, flash flooding, very high, and the potential damage that can be done even in this initial wind event, high as well, especially with the damage that can be done, with trees and power lines down and police not able to get to those areas until this is over. Potentially very dangerous and extremely windy as we speak, Chuck.
I can tell, and I was just going to say, I'm going to let you go and get out of that wind right now. Steve Patterson in St. Petersburg, Florida. Steve, thank you. Let me bring in NBC News meteorologist Samara Theodore to get the latest on this path of the hurricane. And Samara, actually, my biggest question is, how long is this thing going to sit on the peninsula? I say that because I got a mom in Seminole County, just northeast of Orlando, and that's what they're bracing for.
Exactly. So it's getting ready to move in their direction, and it should be arriving as we head into throughout Thursday. So Orlando's going to start to see their symptoms from the storm really revving up as we head through the next couple of hours, and we anticipate it really taking its time meandering. to the northeast at 9 miles per hour, but we're going to start seeing this slowing down even further. So it's going to be at least 24 to 48 hours before it's really clear of central Florida. And you'll see on the map coming up here that we could see this linger into parts of Savannah through the end of the week. So here's a look right now at Ian. Just look at the gravity of this storm, how big it is. It's really encompassing all of southern Florida right now. And as we go through time, you can see all the lightning around the eye, and that's just a signifier of how strong the storm is. You don't see that with a lot of hurricanes unless they're major hurricanes. So the latest coming in, it's still carrying that Cat 4 status until we get that next update. Like I said, moving to the northeast at 9 miles per hour. Currently right now, you're starting to see that eye really concave, get smaller and shrink, but do not be deceived. We are still seeing this pack a punch with the Cat 4 winds closest to the eye. So here's the latest on Doppler radar right now. So we have it spinning, and it's Port Charlotte that's seeing the strongest winds getting ready to move into the eye. We still have that surge coming into areas like Sanibel down here with the southern portion of the storm pushing that water inland. And then we are getting visuals of very bad flooding occurring in areas like Fort Myers. Along I-75, things are quiet between Fort Myers and Punta Gorda, but that won't be for much longer. And here, where we see this level of reflectivity, deep reds and pinks, that is extremely heavy rain. We're talking copious amounts of rain being dropped right now in areas like Venice and Sarasota. It does lighten up the farther north you head into Tampa.
Right.
But because it is going to be sticking around for some time, we are anticipating that flooding to start to pick up, Chuck. And so that's going to be the next thing we're looking at.
All right, Samara, I got a bunch of questions. Let me start with the storm surge risk down there below where the eye came in. We know there's going to be a delayed storm surge. When do we know the worst of that surge? When do they know they'll be out of the woods of the worst of the surge? Is it another 3 hours, another 6 hours? What's your estimate?
Well, we still have high tide that's going to be occurring in some of those areas farther south near Fort Myers. Another high tide around 6:45 p.m. Okay. So in all honesty, I would really not even clear us until tomorrow morning. We're going to wait till we see those final totals coming in. So with the storm starting to kind of quiet down, you don't want to go outside still, Chuck.
All right, so there's that. Is this going to be a hurricane the entire time it's in the state of Florida? Like it's going to, we think it won't get weaker than 76 miles an hour.
Well, I think we are going to see that weakening take place. But to your point, it is going to keep and sustain that strength well inland. So we're looking at Cat 3 in Sarasota Wednesday night, tonight at 8 p.m. And then look at this. Orlando could still, or just shy of south of Orlando, we could still be seeing at least Cat 1 hurricane force winds. It's not until it gets to the eastern side where we actually see that turn into a tropical storm force wind scenario. So, yes, this is a very strong storm. Even historically speaking, Chuck, we're looking at a very strong storm.
And the chances this thing can sort of get its eye back together when it hits the Atlantic. I mean, it doesn't look like it's going to sit there long, but how concerned should folks on the southeast coast be?
Well, we aren't expecting this to re-strengthen into a hurricane again. However, it's still going to maintain some level of structure. And because of that, it'll still be a tropical storm. And we're anticipating those in Savannah and Charleston to still get a pretty heavy hit by Friday night into the weekend. We're not really going to see this diminish into remnants until we head into Saturday. And that's well into the Carolinas.
And how wet? Do we expect this storm to be super wet after it does that second? I mean, are we looking at flooding issues in North Carolina? I mean, that's a state that deals with flooding a lot, even with some minor tropical storms.
Absolutely. With this type of system, especially along the coastline in South Carolina, we could be looking at some flash flooding occurring with this system, especially because it's moving so slow. That's really where the issue is coming in.
Just an astonishing storm and an astonishing amount of destruction that it's about to take shape. Anyway, Samara, thank you so much for all of that and for humoring me and all of my questions. I'm going to move to Sarasota, where earlier this afternoon the city's mayor said he expects his city will get a direct hit in the coming hours. So I'm joined now by the Sarasota County Emergency Management Director, Ed McCrane. And Ed, I know you're in the middle of this, so let's not pretend you have, I'm not going to pretend you have many of these answers, but what kind of shape is the county in right now? What kind of, what's the best estimate you have on power, water, things like that?
Well, thank you, Chuck. I appreciate it. Yeah, we're just now starting to see this in the South County because it made landfall, Cayo Costa, and went into Fort Myers and Charlotte Harbor. And we have the town of Inglewood, which is in part in Charlotte County, and the north part of it is in Sarasota. So I know right now it's affecting Port Charlotte. I have a sister in Northport. It's affecting her. They're out of power. So I think everything south of Northport to the water is going to be out of power. And as the storm trajects itself, continues to move north, that power outages are going to, be increasing. We have Florida Power and Light representatives in the EOC. We can actually ask them regularly what the status is. But
are you running on? Are you running on emergency power, or are you running on regular power right now?
Well, we went to generator power when we locked down, and the reason we did that was because we can run 100 hours on generator, and that way we don't have that fluctuation and disruptions if we do have power outages, because we have an automatic transfer switch, so power comes off, they go on, and vice versa. So our technicians, we have an electrician, the generator repair guys are here in the EOC with us, and they can go deploy if something happens. We have 2 generators that run simultaneously. If we lose one, we can still operate.
What about your water situation? I know I have a staffer who's got a relative in Sarasota, and I guess water shut down yesterday at some point.
Only on the areas being evacuated. So because they're barrier islands and they move, our utility folks with the storm surge threat had to shut down the water, and the cities do the same thing. So the water out to Siesta and Casey Key and then Lido and say Longboat, the utility guys shut those off. They also shut down the wastewater system. And then it takes 12 hours to re-energize that. You got to do some boil water testing. So that's the reason for that. But those people that don't have water, the homes that don't have water are homes that should not have anybody in them right now. And that's in the evacuation area.
And that's my final question for you. Florida's gotten a lot of Florida every year gets a lot of new residents. I've always will consider myself a Floridian, even when I don't live there. But there's a lot of people that have never experienced something like this. Have you noticed, are residents heeding your warnings, or are you having a hard time convincing people to take this seriously?
Well, we had Hurricane Irma in 2017, and we learned a lot of lessons. We had 20,000 people. We only had 4 pet-friendly shelters, so now we opened them 4 at a time. We ended up opening 13. So now we open 12 simultaneously, and I expected there to be 15, 20,000 people because the A and the B and the mobile homes is about 160,000 people. Yeah. And last night I had a gaggle of reporters that are sleeping here overnight. They wanted a little press conference. I asked my staff, can you get me the numbers that are in the shelter? Because they're going to ask me that. At 8 o'clock last night, I had 1,750. Okay. We had 12 shelters, capacity of over 30,000. I was like, well, that can't be right. So all night and all day, we've been trying to figure out a way to get more people. So where did they go? Did they leave the area? Did they heed our warnings and go to friends or family? Or did they just stay home and not go to the shelter because they were looking at the timing and thought they had extra time? Right. So today we're up to 4,400 because overnight we did one of those like Amber Alert, wireless emergency alert for to the citizens. We have 500 pets. We've got, people starting to still show up as long as they can, but we've warned them at some point they won't be able to travel and they need a shelter in place.
Well, especially since this storm surge we haven't gotten through the risk of that. Ed McCrane, emergency management team for Sarasota County. Ed, appreciate the time and information you gave us, and we'll be checking back in. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Our live breaking news coverage of this monstrous storm that is hitting the state of Florida will continue in a moment as we follow these conditions, the catastrophic damage, and this overwhelming storm surge from Hurricane Ian. And as we go to break, take a look at what it was like. This is aboard the NOAA plane. This is a research plane that goes through eye walls of hurricanes to get more information. Well, check this one out when it went through Ian's eye wall.
Goes the signs. There goes the beds. Holy cow. Oh!
Welcome back with more of our continuing news coverage here at NBC News of Hurricane Ian. The areas around Tampa, Florida, including St. Petersburg, aren't expected to see the worst of the storm, but they're still currently experiencing strong winds at 60 miles an hour. The potential for wind speeds and gusts of over 110 miles an hour. And that's where we find Morgan Chesky. He is in Tampa, Florida. And Morgan, boy, the Tampa authorities really got out ahead of this in a way that I think is the right, you're never going to me, get penalized for trying to give out early warnings. But there were all sorts of talk of shutting power down, shutting water down. Where do things stand now?
Yeah, Chuck, well, conditions are deteriorating, I can tell you that much. As it stands right now, the decision to shut down power kind of as a protective measure ahead of the arrival of Hurricane Ian. Really, the enormity of the storm not expected to hit until somewhere between 9 and midnight tonight here for the Tampa metro area. The city's holding off on that right now. That said, we already know about 1 million Floridians are already without power. The mayor earlier today said expect power outages to happen because even though they're not getting the brunt of Ian here, we're still going to get tropical storm force winds, potentially Category 1 hurricane winds, 70, 80, 90 miles an hour, more than enough to knock down power lines and potentially cause significant outages here. Unfortunately, we're really not going to know the true toll that Ian's going to take on the Tampa area until nightfall. And that's why there is a lot of concern right now. The mayor is saying earlier today, if you left because you thought it was going to be a direct hit and you're thinking of coming back home, stay put. Stay where you are. Do not come back into the city right now because the worst is yet to come with anywhere from 12 to 24 inches of rain being forecast over the next 48 hours throughout this general area. Chuck?
Yeah, and if you have power where you are, why go back to an area that might not have it? Why don't you wait? It doesn't make any sense to put yourself in a situation where you could be causing more issues. Anyway, as always, thank you. And before hitting Florida's west coast, Hurricane Ian first made landfall in Cuba, thrashing the island as a Category 3 storm. It knocked out all the power for the entire nation. Our own Guad Venegas was able to file this report and document the devastation in Pinar del Río, Cuba.
This is the devastation in Pinar del Río. This is the most affected province in Cuba. We had heard the reports that this is where the Category 3 hit with 129-mile-per-hour winds, and you can see what it left. Complete devastation. These were tobacco houses. You can also see some of the tobacco that they weren't able to take out. And a lot of these places, they prepared and they moved some of the tobacco, but here you can see it, and everything was just destroyed. And in between, you have power lines. Now, this pole is still standing. These two are standing, but the other ones have been knocked down. This whole row of poles going down to the road, you can't see any poles here because they're on the ground. The entire infrastructure of the power grid in this part of the island has been destroyed pretty much. As we were driving here from the capital of the province, the capital is Pinar del Río, is the city. The province is also named Pinar del Río. We were making our way to the rural areas where we were told we would find this type of destruction where people were the most affected. And we only drove maybe 20 miles and arrived here. We spoke to some of the families. Back here, you have houses. A woman lives in that house with her 2 kids. And of course, she no longer lives there. She's staying with a neighbor. All of her stuff is in there. She was able to evacuate and move over to the house that her neighbor owns that's made out of bricks. And you have neighbors down there trying to rescue what they can from the wreckage. That is going to be used to repair some of the houses that are still standing because most of the houses lost their roof. You can see this big structure over here, one of the tobacco houses, no roof. And this devastation continues as you look further and further down. This is Pinar del Río, the most affected area. The people here with very little water, very little food, and no power. And with all of this damage, there's no idea when the power could be restored here as they do whatever it is that they can to get a little bit of rice, a little bit of beans, and some drinking water. Ian has left Cuba, but the destruction remains.
Guad Venegas, able to get down to Cuba and give us that report. Guad, thank you for your work there. And as we've said, cities are bracing for a devastating storm surge, particularly in the southwest part of the state there. It's expected to be as high as 12 to 18 feet in some areas, which, by the way, is twice as high as they've ever recorded in these this part of Florida. So joining me now is Mark Luther. He's the director of the Ocean Monitoring and Prediction Lab at the University of South Florida College of Marine Science. All right, Mark, we've seen this, and we saw this spooky picture earlier where you could see the water being sucked out. And we know it's going to come back. So this surge is it basically the next 10 hours that anywhere south of where this storm made landfall has to be prepared for the worst?
Yes, that's true. We're already seeing some significant storm surges in the Fort Myers Beach area. I've seen some photos sent from there of houses completely inundated. And then you put waves on top of that storm surge. You get a 12 to 16 foot surge, then you put 10 to 12 foot waves on top of that. That's going to flatten anything that it encounters. So, and as was stated earlier, the worst for the Tampa Bay region is yet to come. But again, since we're on the north side or the left side of the eye wall of the storm coming in, we're seeing a negative surge, all the water being knocked out of Tampa Bay right now. So it'll be some time before we can get the port facilities around Tampa Bay back open again, which is the major gateway for petroleum product for the state of Florida. Over half of all the gasoline, diesel fuel, et cetera, even jet fuel for Orlando International Airport all comes through Tampa Bay. So that's our biggest priority now is post-storm recovery for those maritime facilities.
Do you expect the worst of this to be Naples, Fort Myers, and Marco Island, and that this should be a relatively manageable event for Tampa Bay, or is Tampa Bay not out of the woods?
I think Tampa Bay is not seeing the worst of it, but it's mostly going to be a high wind and rain event for Tampa Bay. Not a storm surge event. The major storm surge is going to be primarily from the Sanibel, Captiva, Fort Myers Beach area towards Naples, Marco Island area, as you just stated. We've seen, as I said, a negative storm surge here, and we're not likely to see a big surge, a positive surge coming back in afterwards.
Once again, Tampa Bay. Whether it's, I'm convinced researchers are going to find out there's something about the Gulf that somehow protects Tampa Bay from these direct hits. We'll maybe figure out if it's replicatable or that's just Mother Nature. Mark Luther at USF, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being with us this hour. Our breaking Hurricane Ian coverage will continue with my friend Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.